At Minds and Money in Toronto, we're pleased to be with Warren Irwin, president of Rosseau Asset Management. Warren, thank you for joining us here today. Specifically talk about Bre-X 20 years later.
Sure.
It's a $6 billion fraud and it left apparently someone dead. Can you tell us why we should be hearing from you and your involvement to the whole story here?
Well, the reason people like hearing a little bit about me is that I was a pretty active player in it in the day. I was trading it quite a bit, and personally, I had a very large stake. At one point, I had 5.6 million of my own money in it, which 20 years ago was a lot of money. It's a lot of money today. I followed it very, very closely.
Right. Yeah. And when you flew to Jakarta, and you didn't have a spot in the plane to go to the site, how did you get on the plane to actually go and meet all these Bre-X execs at that time?
Yeah, well, I went to Jakarta to try and talk my way onto the site. So I met with the office manager in Jakarta. And he said, sorry, there's no room in the helicopters to get into site. So, but there's a meeting and a presentation in Balikpapan, which is the southern tip of Borneo, the island in which the discovery was allegedly made. So I flew all the way to Jakarta, then to Balikpapan, and then the night I sat down for the presentation, went out for some drinks with some people at the company, and then the next morning, fortunately, an individual lost his passport on the way there, so there was one spot left on the helicopter, so I got that spot, and I was able to spend 2 days on site.
But despite all the warning flags there, how did you leave and come back to Toronto thinking that this was still real?
The scariest thing that happened to me was the night before. Like I mentioned, we went out for drinks. I was playing pool with a person who worked at the assay lab, and the person looked extremely nervous, and there was just sweat coming off his face, and very shaky, very nervous. And it concerned me enough that I asked him, I said,
is there gold?
The gold is there, isn't it? And he nearly jumped out of his skin. I've never seen anybody do that in my life. So that set the tone for the visit. So I was questioning pretty much everything when I was down there, and things I looked for were the locals fooled, the local Dayak people. They were building homes around the site, so they were fooled. I spoke with some drillers, Australian drillers. They were pretty much fooled, or what. And when I came back to Toronto, I met some geos who used to work on site. They were fooled. But when I was there, I also asked John Felderhoff whether he would be twinning the holes, which was obviously shows a level of skepticism on my part. And he said that would be done in the fall when I got back.
And it never did.
Never got done, so that didn't make me feel good. And then, a lot of dumb things started happening, like the core shack stored all the core, it burned down. A lot of bad things started to happen.
Right.
And I also met a huge skeptic when I returned back to Toronto who gave me 30 reasons why Bre-X was a complete fraud.
Right, and he unfortunately passed away, but he's someone that you ran into coincidentally, correct?
Yeah, it turns out he lived in the same condo building as me, and we ran in the elevator like 2 days after I came back from site. He was a huge skeptic. So we sat down for lunch and he explained all the reasons he believed it was a fraud, and I had obviously logical explanations as to why each of those points were not right. But it really concerned me that there were 30 points that he thought were fraudulent, and then I had 30 points which said, well, that's not the case. So we agreed to keep in touch and just exchange ideas, and at the end of the day, he was absolutely right, and I owe a huge debt of gratitude to an old timer named Dale Hendrick that was quite skeptical and opened my eyes to a lot of the fraud that goes on in the mining business.
Yeah, when you got the call in March, I believe, of '97, that Michael de Guzman, one of the co-founders, was dead, jumped out of a helicopter. Well, how did the events unfold, and how did you bounce back from the obviously complete nosedive of the company?
Yeah, well, what I did was, because of Dale's work, I'd set up a team of people I had in Jakarta, and skeptics who I basically shared some of Dale's thoughts to them and said, listen, there is a chance this could be a fraud. Can you keep an eye out for things? So the night before de Guzman became public that de Guzman was dead, the rumors out of Jakarta were, interestingly enough, that he was killed. He was murdered by the Indonesians, and so that was an interesting rumor. And of course, the next day, it reminded me a lot of the story of New Centuranium. Dale told me about how dead people start showing up near the end of a fraud, and so when the dead people started showing up, I said, get me out.
Now let's talk about what came out of this, because obviously it was horrible. Lots of people did commit suicide because of the money they've lost. However, how did Canada improve its standards for mining?
They've tightened up things a bit for sure, to the point where now mining scamsters have to be a little more sophisticated, and they have become more sophisticated. They lie about different things now. And
like what? What are some red flags?
Well, my big problem is their preliminary economic assessment and the assumptions used in that. So what you have is you have a consultant in there who wants to keep their client happy, and the execs at the mining company are really putting a lot of pressure on them to push down the capital cost estimates and things like that. And really, nothing really ever happens to either the consultants or to the management team when a fantasy PEA is published. And so they lie and cheat and steal in just different ways, more sophisticated ways. But actually, the Bre-X scam was a very sophisticated scam, and the people who did it got away with it. Mike Guzman's living in luxury.
You've said that you have friends who've seen him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So congratulations on winning top hedge fund. Is it manager or hedge fund in the world?
Yeah, we were ranked the top hedge fund in the world. We had one fund that earned 157% last year, which beat out 4,200 other hedge funds globally. So we had a really good year last year.
Right, and you've been quoted in the past saying that a manager in Canada offers more value investing in resource companies versus blue chip stocks. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, as a manager, there's very little people could add by buying the bank stocks. What do you buy? The TD Bank over the CIBC? Well, there's really not much. There's not much difference. There's not much benefit. You might get a percentage point here or a percentage point there, but the real juice in the Canadian market is in the resource sector for sure. That's where somebody who in Canada, with a lot of the management teams in Canada, a lot of the properties in Canada, you could really add a ton of value for your clients if you understand the business and really get into it a lot more than you could in a lot of these blue chip names. So that's why I focus on it.
Right. For our retail audience, can you explain what are some scams that you've come across, how you deal with them, and how we can avoid them?
There's scams going on right now where I believe people are lying their faces off and telling people a lot of things that just frankly aren't true. So it's going on today, I can assure you. So always be vigilant. Just do your very, very best to do as much research as you possibly can. If you really don't know what you're doing, don't put a lot of money into it. Take a few years to learn. I've been doing it for about 30 years, so it's a very long time. I've been lied to a lot. I know a scam pretty quickly when I see it. I know who to trust, who not to trust. But there's a lot of resources online, whether it be some really sophisticated chat groups or whatever, where people could exchange ideas and try and zero in on who's lying, who's telling the truth, and that sort of thing.
Great. Now, lastly, over the years, like you said, you've been in the industry for a while. Some greatest lessons learned?
Yeah, I find with respect to mining, let's take a look at that. The big one is if you back the right people will find the right properties. And if those right properties, they test them, and those right properties are not what they thought they'd be, they drop them, they move on to another one. Whereas if you get a bad management team, I find bad management teams always have bad properties, and they're not likely to drop that property, move on to another one to try and end up with a winner. I remember I backed one management team on a copper gold project, and sure enough, the copper turned out not being there, but they were smart enough. The next project, and that was Andre Gaumont, and he found the Eleanor gold mine on his next shot. So I backed him on one. The shot didn't work, but the next one we found a big gold mine. So that's why you back good management, not necessarily specific properties.
So Warren, can you give us a couple stock picks that's in your radar?
Yeah, well, a name that many people are aware of that we own is Nextgen Energy. It's a big uranium discovery, probably the biggest and richest uranium discovery in the world. We used to be the largest shareholder, now we're the second largest. Li Kai-shing out of Hong Kong came in, and now he is the largest shareholder. Very interesting discovery, very rich. It's in a great jurisdiction, great management team. It's in northern Saskatchewan, it's in Canada. I'm really impressed with what they put together, and all we need is a little bit of luck with respect to the price of uranium, but every day you can rest assured they're drilling up more and more uranium for us.
Great to hear. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.